episode 10 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. We have our insiders with us, of course, Laurie from Oushinery.
Nice to be here.
And from Wine Owners, Nick.
Hello.
And Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hi, nice to be back.
So we're going to dive right in. What we're going to talk about mostly today is what wine can learn from other industries. This is a great technique for creating new innovation in industries, looking at other industries and seeing what they are doing better, seeing what's comparable, and also might give us an indication of where the wine world is headed. Laurie, why don't you start us off? What industries do you think wine could be looking at as an indication of what it should be doing or what it could be doing?
I think a great starter for inspiration would be to be looking at the world of coffee. So coffee is one of the most widely consumed beverage in the US and in the world in general. But just to give you like a stat that I should find a bit mind-boggling is Americans consume 400 million cups of coffee per day, which is just like an amazing number. And we don't probably want them to drink that much wine per day. That would not be healthy. But what's interesting is like specialty coffee sales have increased by 20% annually. And now they account for 8% of this 18 billion US coffee market. And what's really, really interesting is like more and more of those like specialty sales are happening online because consumers want to find product, specialty coffee that may not be, and is most likely not available in the big retail stores or even regular retail stores. So that's been really, the coffee industry has been experimenting with e-commerce sales to a degree that's been very interesting that I think the wine industry can be looking at a bit closer because it's not a massive, leap of imagination, to go from like selling coffee online to selling wine online. Of course, I'm aware that there's different regulation, but in the eye of the consumers, they don't know about the three-tier system. They don't care about the three-tier system. This is not something that is in their mind whatsoever when purchasing online. So I think it's, I have a couple of more things, but I would be curious to hear if maybe you've seen in Europe, Jonathan and Nick, trends in coffee or but just I find a couple of other things that are interesting in that industry. Happy to dive more, but I would be curious to hear from other insiders.
Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I can. I think I don't necessarily have, I do my fair share of drinking coffee. And there here in Germany, at least, Chibo does a good job of getting into every physical place where you might want to buy coffee. But I think what's interesting is to compare the wine industry, the online wine industry, to now to before COVID. And I think before COVID, I think one thing that's allowed us, probably all of us, to build our tech businesses is to tailor our approaches heavily for the nuances of the wine industry and what people were asking. And those have not always been, as black and white as like other tech companies where it's just about the numbers and everything else really doesn't matter. But I think it was an interesting decision for Vivino to now have appointed a CEO that came from completely outside the industry, from Airbnb and Booking.com, and to bring that into a successful wine business, but that outsider sort of perspective that is probably going to be a bit more black and white about how to take Vivino to the next stage of its growth. So and it will be interesting to see if that's something that is unique to Vivino, because if they're a thoroughbred tech company, always have been, and if that's something that grows outside of those niches. I was just talking to a wine association today, and they were talking about how they have, at the end of the events, they have a list of people who came to the event, but they don't do anything with that information until the next time they do an event, and they just send everybody the same mail, come register for our event. And they're like, well, it'd be nice if we could actually, learn more about the people who are coming to our events, and coming to Germany, coming to our events in London, and be able to, send them more valuable information. And that is not what what I'm used to hearing from everybody in the industry. It's much more, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how COVID maybe has planted ideas or made people more comfortable or interested in pursuing these sorts of opportunities. And I think it also, if nothing else, it also shows the role that associations really can play in facilitating connectivity between the buyers and the producers.
Nick, have you taken inspiration from any other industries, or do you see them doing things that grab your attention? And
yeah, and just sort of picking up on what Laurie was saying, sort of thought occurred to me, that you can have the greatest product in the world with limited distribution, and the greatest distribution engine with limited product, and in either case, you're going to be constrained. Your growth will be constrained. And if you layer onto that the kind of natural friction that exists in moving, glass and cases around the place, and all of the challenges with regulation and legislation that go with alcohol, then it creates a holding back of the development of the business. And maybe that's why it's not surprising that the wine market, and particularly the sort of independent retail wine market, has lagged behind others in how it's managed to develop itself. A business which I think is a really interesting corollary is in another market, which is a long tail market where products are pretty limited, where distribution isn't that easy, but where the market is truly global, is in a real niche like the antiquarian book market, where you had clearly lots of little passion-led businesses struggling to get cut through beyond their local market. And then along came Aid Books. And what they understood was the importance of having an industry-specific business system that would make it easy for those businesses to manage their inventory, and provided them a global marketplace that they could connect to. Because all of a sudden, because there was certainty in respect of inventory, because the platform that they had been given, that they were using, knew exactly what they had at any given moment in time, whether it was selling online, whether it was selling over the counter, they were able to participate in the global market. And that global market was partly about selling to consumers, and it was partly about selling to other and trading with other businesses. So I think that the wine market has a lot to learn from a potentially obscure example like that, in terms of the importance of mastering data and the ability to distribute it in real time through a variety of platforms. And I think that does unlock a much broader addressable market in the age that we're in, where digital has made it extremely difficult to aggregate one's overall market and reach it cost effectively. So I think that's a real lesson. And I think perhaps some of the other things that we're going to talk about today around how friction and distribution become either how friction within distribution and how technology platforms can cut through that friction can help significantly grow a market. And that means obviously grow the percentage of activity that's online.
Laurie, you were also, you had some other examples. You said, I mean, do we have still in the wine industry steps to go to be more online? As Nick said, there's still friction there compared to other industries.
Absolutely. Like for me, what I see is just like so much more opportunity for growth. Just looking at another totally different category, for example, for e-commerce sales. If you look at pet food, pet products, we do know that people spend a lot of money on their pets, but not everyone has a pet as well. But like looking at the US, again, for that case, 10% of e-commerce sales last year, of all e-commerce sales, were related to pet food and pet product. And that's about $10 billion US dollars. Per comparison, in the same market last year, the alcohol, I'm speaking alcohol in general, so that includes wine, beer, spirits, the alcohol online sales in the US were 5.5 billion. So it's almost like half. And I would like to think that there's more people drinking than people that have, pets at home. So it's just like really fascinating to me how like the purchase online, like the de facto, like, oh, I need something, let me look it up, like search it either by voice or by, like Google search, is like really becoming second nature. Full disclosure, I have a pet that you may be hearing right now in the background, and I have yet to buy, even like the organic raw food. Yes, I'm one of those person that is delivered to my door. Like it's like I just buy it online. I don't buy it on Amazon or Chewy, which are the leaders, like the big box, like that. But like more like a more local pet store that I've yet to visit in person. But they just come and deliver. They collect the points. They remind me when my food is most likely like running out in my freezer, and it's seamless. And it's just, again, I understand it's not the same constraint. Mind you, they have to deal with frozen product and everything, so it has its own challenges. And it's just second nature. And like I don't know when I'll go into like an actual pet store to buy the food. I go there to still buy like the fun stuff, like toys and everything, but like something a bit more like on repeat, but craft, like you can get fancy, like, which I don't get, like kangaroo meat and venison. And it's insane, like the world of pet food, but it's there for the taking for the people who want. And you can't just go into a regular store and get, duck meat for cat. Like it's a brand new world. The options are limitless and all available online.
Jonathan, is this just about, Nick was talking also about these friction points in distribution and supply, and should we be more practical about how we view the wine business and less emotional? Because as you mentioned, Vivino's now hired somebody from Airbnb, someone outside the industry who's probably just going to look at this, straight up and doesn't care about the romance of this and that and the other thing that we all sort of get involved in because we love it and we need to, but I mean, is this just, or is there something real to that? Is there something real to being romantic and whatever that will always be some kind of flavor of the wine business? Or is this just more about looking at this practically and thinking about, okay, what are other industries doing? Why are we not doing this? Or this is going to happen?
What if it's more that the romanticism is important, but so is measuring the value of the romanticism, and which romanticism gets you the most value, and like putting numbers behind it. So I think one thing that just came to mind actually as you're asking the question is that on one hand we're saying, okay, Vivino has put a former Airbnb-er in charge, but then on a previous podcast, Laurie, you were pointing out by that Airbnb also knew. By putting more emotion and more energy into the photography, people had higher ratings, higher bookings, higher prices. And so it's still all about them, or they're basically measured what type of emotional values increase the value for their members. And so that might be the bringing together of brute force, higher like numbers and emotion, measuring it.
Absolutely. And I think actually, not to jump to the defense of Airbnb, but like, I think it's one of the tech company that actually has been navigating the romance and the values really tied to the technology. You know, like when you think of Uber and everything, they're the bully going into the market. Like it's hard to go behind them. Like, you know, Airbnb, they take stance. Again, I'm not saying it's always like perfect, but like, you know, like encompassing like against racism. Like they leave their value much, like I think much more closer to their chest, not close to the chest, like much more open actually. And you know, like even simply like if you tell me like, oh, like Airbnb, or I don't know how you pronounce it, like VRBO, which is kind of like the Airbnb. I'm like, I know nothing about VRBO, don't care, I don't know them. Airbnb, I feel like I know them, you know, like I feel like it's just like it just I can get behind much more, and given the opportunity for the same cost, like it's just I know I'll be convenient, and know the app will work, and know the booking, like all of that. But it's also like I feel like I don't want to say part of a community because that's I think inflated, but just like overall as a business tech company, I can get behind it much more than like an anonymous. They're not anonymous. I think that's why it's interesting with Airbnb. So I'm really curious about this new person joining Vivino, because they have a sense of romanticism and the importance of it, but they are like you mentioned, Jonathan, like data, numbers are everything as well. Just very, very curious. I'm fascinated by the Airbnb business. I've been an Airbnb host for a while. I'm going on an Airbnb rental next week, and like, you know, like, so it's just like it's avid user, and it's been very interesting to see them grow, even with experiences. We did an Airbnb experience with my team last week, where it was all online with Zoom, and we were learning how to make Roman antique wine cocktails with like a guide from Napoli. And my team, like, it was just amazing. Like it felt emotional. Like what they offer is, it's not just a convenience of a place to stay. Like they at least they strive to do more. And yeah, just interesting business.
Nick, Vivino came in and a few years ago and really started to capture the user, but didn't really have an effect so much on the distribution, on the internal workings of the industry. Is it just a sleeping giant that is about to roar? I mean, is there something going to happen here with Vivino that it, you know, or will it sort of continue to grow and to putt along like it has and get more influential? But or is there something maybe that we're not everybody in the wine industry gets a little bit too comfortable with right now? I don't know, or maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody, to the point that's already been made here, feels that there's an awful long way to go in terms of being able to engage with and reach the consumer online. And clearly Vivino have spent an absolute fortune in building a very engaging environment for wine, for wine purchases to be facilitated through. And the question now remains, and maybe the last 12 months have given us part of the answer, given the significant doubling of turnover, that they can, finally leverage those enormous investments and scale and make money as a business. But at the same time, they're not the only ones out there, are there? And there are businesses like wine.com who are doubling down and investing significant amounts of money. You know, we've heard about 750, if I may talk about them briefly, who have taken on another $23 million worth in funding. I think they're really interesting because, going back to the earlier conversation, they speak to addressing the friction in the market. How do you make it easier for distributors, importers to connect to channels of distribution? How do you make it easier for channels of distribution to decide what their wine list is going to be composed of? How do you make it easier for channels of distribution to be able to market to their audience without having to commit to and tie up capital in stock before they figured out what part of those you know, those wine portfolios are going to resonate with their audiences. So I think Vivino are obviously a really significant part of, but only one part of a massive amount of a wall of money that is going into alcohol retailing and wine and fine wine retailing in particular, and trying to figure out what true deep customer engagement looks like, and how those average order values can be pushed up from maybe $15 a bottle, which is very typical, to the kind of holy grail of $25 a bottle, where actually some of those online businesses are going to start to make real money. And I think that's the big question right now: is at what point are these vast sums of money that are being poured into these businesses going to earn a return on investment?
Jonathan, what about you? What do you think about this kind of almost new money coming into wine tech? It seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to see. I would say, like, if you look over the last 10 years, I mean, there's been more transactions, I think, in the last six or 7 months in the wine tech scene than in the entire previous 10 years. And it is, I think, an exciting moment for the industry to see investors getting behind it. It is obviously a very difficult industry just because of things we've talked about before, like the friction that, like, due to regulations, the weight of the bottle, just the difficulties, and it's not a digital product that you can make in one country and download in another country. There is a lot of complexity there, but I think the investment shows a confidence that many of these problems are being addressed, and that there is a feeling that of momentum here. And and we've talked about it before, I think, as well, that COVID's been very uncomfortable, to say it lightly, for much of the wine industry, but if some of the efficiencies of digital is what comes out of this, you know, it's that would be one of the that would be a happy ending to COVID, so to speak, to have more enthusiasm, more experience. I think it's also something to maybe go down a different path, is that you need experience to be successful at that. And there hasn't been a lot of people with this experience in the industry. And in the last year, because of the lockdowns, a lot of people have had crash courses in how to do digital businesses, and that experience is probably starting to trickle out into new places.
Laurie, we've talked a lot about what wine can learn from other industries, but what about the reverse? You know, as a final thought, what are we doing in the wine industry that is so interesting, that maybe creates higher value, that creates I don't know, the romanticism we're talking about before, the magic you do with Oushinery? Like what is there something there that other industries can learn from us?
Absolutely. Not everything is bad on how the wine industry is like approaching, this. I think like the experiential. I think the wine industry is extremely talented at delivering in-person experiences, maybe at the tasting room, even like trade events. And I think, funny enough, when I was doing this research for this podcast, like I was reading like coffee companies looking at, what are the things that the wine industry is doing really well and what they can, emulate and do their own way. So it was just like, it's nothing is in a silo. And I think even more so nowadays. So I think the wine industry is really, really, talented in that level. It's just in person. And I think sometimes it's just a lack of, I don't want to say creativity, but just like assigning experience and time to like, what can that mean in a more like online world? How can you deliver an experience? And we're starting seeing that again. Like that's a silver lining of the pandemic. It's just, and I'm not just talking about like online, Zoom wine tasting, but like those were never or very rarely done before. But like a lot of people kind of love them, or just like experiences. Right now, I'm part of a club. It's a wine and movie club, and it's all online. And I get wine delivered to my door, just like 2 bottles, which is already a lot for one night. You're not supposed to, it's not tasting, it's a drinking experience. And you watch a movie that is a festival, like typically like a movie that just airs during festival. And like you open the bottle with everyone on Zoom, talk a bit about like how this movie was made, then turn off your Zoom, watch your movie, drink with whoever is in the room with you, and then go back online and share, definitely a bit more tipsy, but like share like how you enjoyed the movie, how you enjoyed, like the wine experience. Why did the person putting the event together choose this wine to go with, this movie? And it's just so much fun. And I don't know if this would have happened even just 2 years ago, even though technically technology-wise, it was all there. So that gets me really excited. I think there's so much creativity there that can happen. And I don't have all the answer, of course, but I just, it gets me excited.
Well, I think that was a great final note. This has been episode 10 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. I'd like to thank Jonathan from Bottlebooks, Laurie from Oushinery, and Nick from Wine Owners. We'll see you again in a few weeks.